Welcome back, fellow sewing enthusiasts and fashion adventurers. Today, we're diving into a world of classic charm and sheer elegance with Lana Dress. Crafted for comfort, designed for elegance, this dress is your perfect partner for any and all chic escapades. From casual days out to enchanting evenings, the Lana has got you covered, quite stylishly. Let's gather our supplies. Start by measuring and cutting your interlining fabric, making sure it's an exact match to your collar stand, button stand, and cuff pieces. This precision is key, so your pieces can become perfect partners in your creative dance. Gently place the interlining fabric on the wrong side of each fabric piece and press with an iron that interlining in place. Grab 2 cuff pieces and let's put them to work. You're going to fold the top part of the cuffs inward. It's a small fold, just 1 centimeter. Make sure to fold towards the wrong side of the fabric. Next, you'll need to place the top and under cuffs together, right sides facing each other. Align them along the side edges and the bottom. Sew using a 1 centimeter seam allowance. After sewing, trim the seam allowance to keep it narrow. Also, don't forget to trim the corners at an angle. Once you've done that, it's time to flip the cuffs right side out and give them a good press. Let's move our focus on the collar. We're going to unite the upper and under collar by sewing them together. Here's how. First, align them with their right sides facing each other. They're about to become the best of friends. Pin around the sides and the outside edge. Then, sew using a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Now, for a dash of precision, when you approach the corners, sew a sharp point by smoothly pivoting. Next, trim the seam allowance and say goodbye to the surplus fabric at the corners. Once you've done that, turn the collar to the right side. Voila! And for that extra touch of perfection, press the collar gently. Last but not least, it's time to top stitch the sides and outside edge. Here's a nifty trick. Use the edge of your machine foot as a guide. Grab 1 piece of your collar stand and fold the bottom edge 1 centimeter inwards, bringing wrong side to wrong side, just as we did with the cuffs. Next, gather the 2 parts of the collar stand. They are about to become inseparable friends, with the collar nestled snugly between them. Place the collar on top of 1 collar stand, right sides together, and align the bottom of the collar with the top of the collar stand, matching the notches. Then place the second collar stand on top of the construction, Right sides together and match the notches once again. Pin in place. Stitch along the sides and top edge of the collar stand. Now let's do some fine-tuning. Trim the seam allowance narrowly. Turn the collar stand and smooth out any wrinkles or folds with your iron. Your collar is now ready to be attached. To prepare the button stands, start by folding them in half lengthwise wrong side to wrong side. This will create a crease down the center of each piece. Next, fold one long edge of the button stand again, this time 1 centimeter towards the wrong side of the fabric. This will create a neat and tidy edge that will be easy to work with when attaching the buttons. Make sure that the folds are mirrored. Time to move on to the bodice pieces. To give your garment extra durability, it's a great idea to apply some fusible reinforcement tape on the shoulders and bottom of both the front and back yoke. This will help to prevent any stretching or tearing, keeping your garment looking great for longer. Simply follow the manufacturer's instructions to apply the tape on the wrong side of the fabric, and you'll be all set. Take the top of the front bodice and place it on the bottom of the front yoke, right sides together. Make sure to match the notches and ends carefully. Sew the seam at 1 centimeter and then press the seam towards the yoke. Overlock the seam to finish it off neatly. To finish off the yoke seam nicely, you'll want to top stitch it. Sew the top stitching on the front yoke side, making sure to catch the seam allowance as well. Use the edge of the machine foot as a guide to keep your stitching straight and even. Let's give those back bodice pieces a little touch-up. Overlock the center back edges to make them neat and tidy. Next, place the 2 back bodice pieces with their right sides together, letting them align at the center back edge. Stitch them up with a 1 centimeter seam allowance, starting from the top and gracefully gliding down to the notch. And for the finishing touch, gently press that seam open, letting it lay flat. Place the back yoke atop the back bodice, making sure their right sides are together. Those notches, let them meet and match perfectly. Mark with chalk the center back notch and the seam allowance, so it would be simpler to pivot while sewing. Sew in place using a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Make sure that the center back seam allowance is open and pivot at the center back notch. Finish off by giving the edge an overlocked seam, and then press the seam towards the yoke. Sew a top stitch on the back yoke side, making sure to catch the seam allowance as well, just as we did on the front yoke. Use the edge of the machine foot as a guide to keep your stitching straight and even. Time to attach the button stand to the center front pieces of your garment. Start by placing them right sides together, making sure to align the notches carefully. Pin the button stand in place along the center front edge. Next, sew along the pinned edge at a distance of 1 centimeter, securing the button stand to the front pieces. To finish the button stand, take the turned seam allowance of the under button stand and pin it in place around the seam, taking care to insert the seam allowance inside the button stand. Next, use a flat top stitch to secure the under button stand at the seam edge. Sew along the edge of the seam at a distance of 1 millimeter from the edge. Press the button stand. Let's unite those bodice pieces. Begin by pairing up the front and back bodice pieces, right sides facing each other, and sew them together along the shoulders. Gently press those seams open with an iron and give the seams a classy overlock treatment. Take the sleeve bias piece and fold it in half lengthwise, ensuring that the wrong sides are together. Now, fold the long edges of the binding once more toward the wrong side, aligning them with the center crease you created earlier. Press along these newly folded edges with an iron to set them in place. This will create a narrower strip with all raw edges concealed. It's time to add the binding to the sleeve vent. Position the bias binding along the edge of the vent. Ensure that the edge is neatly tucked between the folded edges of the binding, fully enclosing the raw edges of the fabric within the binding. Using your sewing machine, sew a top stitch approximately 2 millimeters from the folded edge of the bias binding. This stitching will secure the binding in place while creating a clean and finished look. Cut the surplus fabric of the binding and sew a little diagonal top stitch at the peak. On the wrong side of the sleeve. Let's keep our focus on the sleeve. Align it with the armhole, ensuring that the right sides are facing each other. Keep an eye out for the notches on the sleeve and armhole. These need to match to ensure everything aligns perfectly. With everything aligned and secure, it's time to sew the sleeve and armhole together. Use a 1 cm seam allowance from the raw edge. Overlock the seam and press it towards the bodice. Next, you'll want to bring the sides of the bodice together. Make sure the right sides are facing each other. Align the edges of the fabric perfectly and double-check that the sleeve hems and the waistline are also aligned. Once everything's in position, pin the edges together. Now, it's time to sew. Run a neat line of stitches along the edges of the bodice, starting from the sleeve hem and continuing to the hem of the shirt. Press the seam open and overlock. Next up, grab your outer cuff piece and place it on the bottom of the sleeve, right sides together. Once they're perfectly aligned, pin the two pieces together, making sure the edges are perfectly matched, and create the sleeve pleat towards the side. Now it's time to sew. Make sure to keep a 1 centimeter seam allowance. After sewing, press the seam allowance towards the inside of the cuff. Take the under cuff piece and turn under the seam allowance so it is hidden on the inside of the cuff. Pin the under cuff in place around the cuff edge, making sure the seam allowance is inserted inside the cuff and the 2 leading front edges are symmetrical. Use a flat top stitch to securely attach the under cuff to the cuff edge. Sew at a distance of 0.5 centimeters from the edge. Let's bring together the outer collar stand and the neckline. Place them right sides together. Remember to match the notches and pin in place. Sew in place using a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Next, fold the lower edge of the under collar stand under, just like we did with the cuffs. Pin it in place around the neck, making sure to tuck the seam allowance inside the collar stand. Finally, we'll secure everything with a top stitch. Sew it 0.5 centimeter from the right side. Overlap the button stands, placing the right bust piece on top of the left bust piece, and sew them together using a 0.5 centimeter seam allowance from the raw edge. For that dreamy gathered effect on your bodice, sew 2 basting stitches on the bottom of the bodice. Start by sewing the first row of gathering stitches at 0.5 centimeter from the edge. Leave generous long tails on your stitches for ease of gathering later. Follow that up with a second row, this time a bit deeper in at 1.5 centimeter from the edge. Let's dive into the skirt magic. Take the center front and side front skirt pieces and lay them out right sides together. Pin them in place. Stitch up their sides using a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Give the seams an overlock stitch and press those seams smoothly toward the side. Sew a top stitch at 0.5 centimeter from the seam on the side skirt piece, catching the seam allowance also. Overlock the center back of the back pieces separately. Then, let's pin them right sides together. Start sewing that center back seam. Begin from the zipper notch and work your way down. Press the seam open. Lay the front skirt piece and the back skirt pieces on top of each other, right sides together. Pin the skirt pieces along the sides. Sew the skirt pieces together using a seam allowance of 1 centimeter. Press the seam to flatten it and overlock after. Lay the front skirt ruffle pieces on top of each other, right sides together. Pin the ruffle pieces together along the center front raw edges with the notch, leaving the sides open. Press the seam open to flatten it and overlock the seam. Repeat with the back ruffle pieces and sew the central back seam. Press the seam open to flatten it and overlock the seam. Lay the front ruffles on top of the back ruffles, right sides together, aligning the raw edges. Pin in place. Sew the ruffles together. Press the seam open to flatten it and then overlock. Overlock the outer edge of the ruffles. Next, gently turn up the hem 0.6 centimeters to the wrong side of the fabric and top stitch 0.4 centimeters. Press the hem with an iron. Let's bring our ruffles and skirt right side together. Lay the top edge of the ruffles over the bottom edge of the skirt, making sure to match the notches. Position it on top of the skirt panel, right sides together, aligning the raw edges. Match the notches on both pieces. Pay attention to the side seam of the skirt, as it should align with the side seam of the bodice. Also, that the center front of the button stand aligns with the center front notch of the skirt. Pulling the gathering threads you stitched earlier on the bodice bottom. Gently tug on the threads while evenly distributing the gathers along the fabric. Once the gathers are adjusted to your liking, carefully pin the bodice and skirt together, securing the gathers in place. Once everything is aligned, sew in place using a 1 cm seam allowance. Press the seam and overlock. Remove the second gathering stitch. Position the zipper along the right side of the skirt, starting at the waist seam, ensuring that the right sides of both the zipper and skirt are facing each other. Align the zipper's raw edges precisely with the side edges of the dress. Switch to a concealed zipper foot on your sewing machine. Follow the guide on the zipper foot, stitching as closely to the zipper teeth. Repeat on the other side. Fold the zipper ends towards the dress and pin in place. With the center back seam allowance folded inwards to the wrong side, sew a top stitch along the center back bodice vent, sewing as close to the overlocked edge as you can, going from the right side to the left side. Sew the snaps or buttons on the button stands and cuff. Fold the belt in half lengthwise, right sides together. Pin. Sew along all the raw edges using a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Remember to leave a gap of approx. 8 cm at the center back to turn the belt through. Remove the bulk from the corners. Turn the belt to the right side and press the seam on the very edge. Hand sew the gap closed with a flat fell or blind hem stitch. Congratulations, your dress is now complete. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to smash that subscribe button and hit the bell icon.